All right, welcome everyone to this Q&A. Again, want to welcome everyone to this Q&A. It's good to be back. Hope everyone had a great Passover, whoever celebrated. So I want to start off with I guess more of an observation more than a question, but we'll see where this goes. I just had the opportunity met whatever old friends from whatever way back many years since I was a kid. At least one of them knows me since I was a kid. And whatever, I happened to meet them. I had an opportunity to go to the Western Wall, which I don't always have an opportunity to go to, so I've kind of been spoiled, but don't go as often as I should. Right in God's backyard. That is the holiest place, in the world. And it's people, much older and probably going to come live here. And I mentioned to them they're in Tel Aviv. So I mentioned, Tel Aviv is holier than New Square, New York. It's holier than Lakewood, New Jersey, right? Some of the strongest Jewish communities, in the States, or Golders Green in England, or whatever. Even though that Tel Aviv has one of the biggest gay lesbian communities in the world, unfortunately, right? Nonetheless, still a holy place, right? Obviously Jerusalem holier than Tel Aviv, obviously Hebron holier than Tel Aviv. There's a hierarchy, of which cities are more holy than others. In Israel, that's not really the topic here. But one thing from this discussion that came out with, without going into details, I'm sure other classes will come out, but just one observation, and that is that Kaufman's law always is, if you're going to do it, you're going to do it right. If you're not going to do it, then don't bother, right? Some people say, well, it's kind of extremist to say, right? But again, if you mess around, if you get distracted, which is very easy to get distracted in this world, if you get, distracted, you hang out with the wrong people, different things, what's going to happen, right? The inevitable will happen, right? And that is that a person is going to be overcome by Morenu V'Rabbeinu, the Yetzer, right? The Yetzer, evil inclination, is going to take over. And eventually what's going to happen? Person will just give in to desire. I spoke yesterday in my BJQ radio podcast. Mentioned, what Rabbi Opian says about who's one of the great Torah giants of the last generation, was a spiritual mentor in yeshiva in Rechasim, which is near Haifa, and student of his, Dov Yafi, blessed memory, used to give vadim, used to give Musar Shmuz, let's say, speak about ethics, after Shabbos. And so someone wrote a book about things he said, then he went in alphabetical order, different ideas he brought out, right? Different things. And so whatever, started at the beginning, and he talks about Adam, right? Talks about mankind. So he says that, a person can say, well, I have free choice to do what I want. I can do whatever I want, right? So Revelio Opian said, very good. Animals say the same thing. Animals can say the same thing. I'll do what I want. So what makes a person different than animals? So spoke for a long time about this, but the punchline, the bottom line, was the punchline, bottom line, right, was that we have the ability to go against our nature. We have the ability to fight against our nature when, negative things. Animals can't do that. Animals are programmed, right? Plants, animals, stars, sun, the moon, all these things, they don't have free will. Man is the only being that has free will. Right now, why do I bring this up? I'm not going to rehash what I said yesterday. That was for an hour and a half. But why do I bring it up now? Because I saw, and heard things that were very hard to hear, very depressing, right? Extremely depressing. So what you see, though, is, as I mentioned before, if you're not going in the way of Torah, and again, this isn't a curse. This isn't to say, wow, everyone else out to lunch and this and that. I mean, that is true. But if you don't, do things right and your mind is not focused in Torah mitzvahs, then what differentiates you, i.e. people, mankind, what differentiates them from animals? And what's the answer? Nothing. Now, the Torah says that animals created on day 5. Right? Go back to the book of Genesis, chapter 1. Animals created day 1. Very good. Sorry, day 5. Very good ones, man created day 6. So now, if man does the right thing, goes in the right path, then man's the pinnacle of creation. Then we're the greatest of creation. If man does the wrong thing, then animals are better than man. Why? Because they're created before. Well, there's one major difference between man and animal, right? Each person, male, female, Jew, non-Jew, doesn't matter. Each person has the animalistic inclination, what we call the nefesh behemoth, right? The animalistic inclination. Everybody has. Now, that's all animals have. They don't have anything else. We also do things like animals, very good. Yeah, but we have the ability, God breathed in the spirit of life, right? Jews to non-Jews, very good. So we have the ability to overcome the evil inclination. Now, you can tell me, the Gemara says, very hard to do, right? God created the antidote to the evil inclination, which is Torah. But the Gemara says, but you need heavenly help. You need God to help you, right? You need to pray to overcome the evil inclination. Very good. So I heard enough things today, again, one meeting, for a couple of hours, by me, that's it. I got enough material for months. Certain things, if they're not done right, you'll pay the price. You will just pay the price spiritually. If anyone converts and say, hey, I want to convert quicker and just take less time, it's not to your benefit. Mentioned this many times. It's not to a person's benefit. Right? Because the Gemara says, why is a convert after they convert? Why do they get punished, tossed around even worse than they are before they convert? The Gemara says, because they didn't learn what they were supposed to properly. Yeah. So what about Noahites? Pick on some Noahites out there. Right? What about Noahites? Yeah. So it's very interesting. The Gemara says that if a non-Jews, if a Jew, sorry, let's say better, if a Jew, his ox scores a non-Jew's ox, Jew doesn't have to pay. He's exempt from pay. A non-Jew's ox who scores a Jewish ox, according to the Torah, he's got to pay. He's obligated to pay. What's the difference? You're going to say, why do we discriminate against non-Jews, right? No offense to any non-Jews listening, right? What's going on? Gemara says a very interesting thing. Gemara says, why the money of non-Jews is hefker in this case, is ownerless? Because they didn't keep the Noahide laws. Not they didn't keep them properly. They didn't keep them. So I saw this whole discussion. Somebody asked, which actually is a good segue, right? Somebody had asked the question. Someone put up a post and asked the question. It was a good question, right? I didn't chime in. I saw a lot of other answers, but it was an interesting question. And the question was, if the Noahide laws, why doesn't Torah say anything? Right? See, anyone who hates oral law will hate this question. Why doesn't the Torah say anything? Torah doesn't tell me what non-Jews can keep and not keep. Torah doesn't tell me anything. Right? Torah tells me all the laws Jews have to keep. Now, the whole question, do these laws or some of these laws, do they apply to non-Jews or not? Right? Open question. Does it apply or not? Now, some may apply. Right, well, the holidays may not apply. Other things may not apply. Very good. Right? Very good. So why aren't they mentioned? Why aren't they mentioned explicitly? The Gemara, in a few places. Sanhedrin, Tractate Sanhedrin, the few pages speak about it. A few other places speak about it, but it's limited. Not like a big discussion. And there aren't really major commentaries speak about it. Right? You have, who's the earliest commentator that really speaks about it in depth is the Rambam. Right? It's kind of late. No one else speaks about it. There is a book, say for the Minchas Chino. It's a commentary. We're not sure exactly who wrote it, but it's a commentary on all the mitzvahs. Right? Every Torah portion has mitzvahs in it. Right? Well, I shouldn't say every. I mean, Genesis only has 3. Right? But he goes, Torah portion by Torah portion, and he goes through all the mitzvahs, and he says, what's the source of the mitzvah, the background of the mitzvah, what does it apply to, not apply to. So many, many times, the Minchas Chinuch will comment and say, it applies to a non-Jew or it doesn't apply to a non-Jew. And he said, I wrote a whole book called The Laws of Noahide. What's the problem? We don't have it. Got lost. Right? Somehow, in their travels or whatever, it got lost. We don't have it. We never printed. All right? But a manuscript got lost. So we don't have it. So the question, I'll give my answer in a second, but the question still stands. The Torah, the Gemara learns from the Torah, from the verses explicitly in Genesis, which laws apply to non-Jews. Why they, and why they apply to non-Jews. Yeah, as well. Very good. But what's a simple answer? Some people write this or write that or write the other thing. I was going to put up with a very simple answer. The very simple answer. See, non-Jews, after they die, after 120 years, they get upstairs, God asks them, did you keep Torah? What's Torah? Well, okay, you're right. You're exempt from Torah. Right? Did you keep the Noahide laws? Is it one of the Noahide laws? You don't know what the Noahide laws are? You never taught the Noahide laws? What are they? They have no idea. But now, if someone doesn't have any idea what the law is, right? We use non-Jews here as an example. If they don't have any idea what the laws are, can they be punished? You'd say it's not fair. Right? God has to be fair in his world. So if God has to be fair, I would say, give me an answer. Tell me what the laws are. Right? If they choose to follow it, good. If they don't choose to, okay. But at least give them an opportunity. So what's Kaufman's very simple answer? The laws are universal, stupid. That's it. If I was God, put on my funny George Burns glasses, my funny mustache, that's what I would say. You dimwit, what do you mean? You didn't know? You didn't know? You're not allowed to kill? No, euthanasia's different. We're putting grandpa out of our own memory. We don't want him to suffer. That's murder. Like sticking a gun in his head. It's murder. Yeah? You didn't know you're not allowed to steal? No, that's different. My taxes, Uncle Sam, he takes too much. That's different. They're not going to get punished for something they couldn't have known, right? That wouldn't be fair, right? Now, what if a Jew found out he's actually Jewish later in life, but he never knew? Okay, he's exempt. It's an onus, right? That's considered something beyond his control. No possible way could have known, right? So God will deal with it in a different way. Very good. What about non-Jews? Pick on some non-Jews here. What about non-Jews? They don't have an answer. They have no answer. These laws are universal. God could just, demolish them, destroy them. So what? You didn't know? You didn't know? You're supposed to set up law courts? How are they supposed to know? You grew up in India worshiping cows. They know idolatry is forbidden. Right? Someone will say, come on, you're the Jewish nation. You're the Jewish people, chosen amongst all nations. Very good. So you have an obligation to go out there. Someone's still dogging me to this day on that. Right? It's good to have trolls, right? It means I must be doing something right. So, they'll say you got an obligation to enlighten the nations. I have an obligation to teach non-Jews what's obvious. Listen, if someone wants to learn, they'll come, they'll find their path, right? Gemara says, if you want to go on the right path, God will help you. If you want to go on the wrong path, God will not stop you. But what about something obvious? Obvious. I'm not talking something you never would have figured out. That wouldn't be fair, right? God's going to zap someone for something they couldn't have known. That's not fair, right? We'd have a good claim. What if it's something obvious? You got no claim. Then a person saying, look at all these people. Look at all these people in India worshiping cows. Yeah. Look at all these people, that are going to die. It's idolatry. Okay. You go, isn't that terrible? Isn't it tragic? Yeah, it is. Do I tell people to worship cows? Contacts from many, many people in India, they get out of it. Some people. If you're in communist China, you're waving Mao's red flag. You're going to say, Abraham is an atheist. Okay. Abraham, at the age of 3 or the age of 40 or even older, came to the conclusion that he was a designer of the world. Why? Because the world of design. Very easy to pinpoint. That's not the point. If a person can see there's design in their world, there must be a designer. It didn't happen by accident. So there must be a God. Must be somebody who's a designer. I mean, you got these quote-unquote big-time atheists. Very easy to disprove them. Things cannot happen so randomly in many ways. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is that someone wants the information. It's very easy to get. Someone wants to be brainwashed. Also very easy. They can say, what do you want? I grew up in an atheist country. Okay. But isn't there aren't there things that make sense according to nature? According to our intelligence? You would think. Obvious things. One thing I learned from the Brady Bunch back in the day, right? Winners never cheat and cheaters never win. The way it goes. You say, so what? So in God's world and in God's mind, he has to give everybody a fair chance. A fair chance to get knowledge. He can't punish somebody and say, well, you never got the knowledge, so I'm going to punish you. Right? For non-Jews, this is worse because they have no claim. They have no claim over you. And what's the reason? Because these things are universal. But the Rambam throws in a little bit of a knach, a little bit of a curve here. The Rambam in the Laws of Kings says that in order for a Noahide to be a Noahide, you don't have to go in front of a rabbinical court. That's hogwash. Don't let anyone brainwash you. That's only for a Ger Toshav, someone who lives amongst the Jewish people in Israel. Right? But we don't have a Ger Toshav today because we don't have a Jubilee year. Right? It's dependent on the Jubilee year. Now, if someone wants to do it, they could do it. They can go in front of a rabbinical court. Right? They can declare they're taking on the Noahide laws. Very good. They can give them a plaque. Right? Certain groups do that. They'll give them a plaque. You can put it on the wall. Okay. I don't think it's worth very much. You can do it. Makes you feel good, makes you, strengthen yourself. At the very least, maybe they should declare themselves Noahides in front of 2 witnesses. Okay. Not a problem. Obligation? Certainly not. Certainly not an obligation. So the Rambam throws in a little bit of a curve. The Rambam says that if a Noahide believes that the Torah, these things make sense, and they're going to keep the Noahide laws because they make sense, doesn't make them a Noahide. Says the Rambam, what's going to make them a Noahide? They have to declare, and they have to, not declare, but they have to understand that they're keeping the Noahide laws because God passed the Torah down to Moses. And Moses codified it at Mount Sinai. That's why they have to keep it. Because if they only keep it based on my own intellectual capability, right? Very good. Rambam says, doesn't work. It's not about your own intuition. It's not about what you think is universal. It's what's universal according to the Torah. So this makes it much worse for non-Jews. Much, much worse for non-Jews. Right? And the reason I would say is very simple, because these things are universal. These things are obvious. So you don't need Jews preaching to non-Jews, even though it's a big thing by Chabad. You don't need Jews to preach to non-Jews to keep Noahide laws. To keep laws that are universal. That's not my job. Right? Doing Jewish outreach. That's not my job. Right? Many Jews don't know anything. 13.5 million Jews don't know the Aleph base. That's worse. And all Jews are interconnected. Now, non-Jew comes, they want to learn, you get an obligation to help them. You can't help them, you send someone else who can. Okay. But like, I can see God with a big smile and say, come on, really? You're coming to me with this claim? That these things are universal. Oh, like, you say, I didn't give you brains. Right? So there's a famous medrash. The medrash talks about a fisherman. Fisherman gets up to heaven. What does God ask him? Did you learn Torah? 2 questions you get asked. Right? Did you learn Torah? You're honest and business. Difference of opinion, what question comes first. But let's say, first question, did you learn Torah? Fisherman says, Torah? You didn't give me brains to learn Torah. Not that I didn't have time. I wasn't smart enough. Right? Maybe going to claim he's mentally challenged. I don't know. I won't say the R word because then I'll get pulled off from YouTube. Okay, so he'll say I'm mentally challenged. Well, God says, okay, let's see. Let's play back the video. Right? God says, what did you do for a living? So he says, I was a fisherman. Very good. So how'd you make a living? How were you able to trap fish? He said, I made this intricate nets, and I went out, and I did this, and I did that, and I was able to trap all these fish. I was able to make a good living doing that. You know what God answered? The Medrash says, very scary proposition. God says, I bet the same God who gave you the brain power, right, gave you the brains in order to fish, in order to make a living being a fisherman, probably gave you the same amount of brains in order for you to learn Torah. What a kick in the head. You don't want to hear that. Right? He said if I gave it so, he's embarrassed. Totally embarrassed. That's part of what hell is. What we call Gehenna. It's embarrassment. That's part of atonement. I don't know how you get embarrassed. Right? You shake your proverbial shoulders that you don't have as a spiritual, as a soul, however that works, right? Doesn't really matter. That's embarrassing. Right? That's like having your hand in the cookie jar. And you're coming up with Webster's 8 definition saying why your hand was in the cookie jar. Yeah? God's going to say, well, I gave you brains. Then a person can say, well, I got distracted. There are a lot of good things out there. Yeah, movies, sports, drugs, other things, women, booze, who knows, whatever. Like Victor Miller, blessed memory, once said, you can learn a lot of things in university and college, like narcotics, or you can take 2 major subjects, booze and women. I don't think things have changed, probably got worse, since I was in university back in the day. But in any case, God can sit there and say, really? He says, yeah, you made a distracting world. God says, I didn't make it, you made it. You did all these things to get distracted. Okay. So Ramchal says, we're in this world to toil. Right? It says in Derech Hashem, it says in Path of the Just, we're in this world to toil. That's what we're here for. Fight our evil inclination, very good. But you got brains? God gave you brains, doesn't mean you can have average intelligence, doesn't matter. If you're mentally challenged, different issue. Well, let's say average intelligence should be able to see there's a world of design, and there's a creator, and you got to serve him. And there are things you have to do, but they're obvious things. Obvious things. Why do you need law courts? I mean, law courts, they are a joke in many ways. But why do you need law courts? Why do they set up law courts? Because if you didn't have law courts, it'd be 10 times worse. 10 times worse. Imagine, it's a joke. Someone get thrown in jail today, get, spit out straight away. In certain places, you can steal up to like $1,000, you won't get prosecuted. That's a disaster. It's an absolute disaster. That's why the generation of the flood got destroyed. It wasn't because of idolatry, immorality, or murder. They did all those things also, right? And those things you have to give up your life for rather than commit the act, i.e. idolatry, murder, or immorality. Applies to Jews, not to non-Jews, but okay. But what's the reason? What's the reason they got destroyed? Stealing. You're going to say, but stealing, if a Jew or non-Jew put a gun to your head and say, steal this money from this person, I'm going to kill you, you can do it. You don't have to give up your life. Question would be, if you gave up your life, is that called suicide? You don't have to give up your life. You can do it. I'm not saying you should, but you could. That's not something you have to give up your life for. Right? So why would that be such a strong thing that the other big three you have to give up your life for rather than commit the transgression? That I can hear. Yeah, that I can hear that generation. Okay, wipe them out. Wipe them out because of all the terrible things they did. Good. What about over here? Stealing? Okay, it's bad. No one's going to say not. It's bad. But you see, if it's lawlessness, everyone's stealing from other people, there's no justice. Society cannot be sustained. That's why God destroys Sodom. Not just that Sodom was in its own backyard, and God's backyard. That was worse, as the Rambam says, right? But what was so bad about Sodom? I mean, they did terrible things, but one of the things they did also was they would steal a little bit, even as a non-Jew, that they'd be exempt. They'd be exempt from law court. So a person would steal like a drop from one person. Then another person would come and steal another drop from the same person. And then a third person would do the same thing. They get all their friends, whatever, thousands of people. And what do? They steal everything from the person. They can't be prosecuted. Now, in a society like that, can it be sustained? No. So God says, we got to wipe it out. Totally have to wipe it out. Right? If there's total lawlessness, today in the States, many places jump. Next time I'm there, I want to go shopping for my kids. Go to a department store. Take out less than $1,000. We'll make it easy, $750. Whatever it is, take this, do all the math. Whatever. Just walk out the door. Great way to go shopping. Get all stuff a wardrobe. Get a winter wardrobe, right? Perfect. Well, they're probably not selling winter stuff now, but most places now it's getting warm or getting warmer, whatever. Right? That'd be a great idea. Get a lot of kids, get one kid this thing, someone else something else. Very good. You got a whole wardrobe. Come in the next day, steal some more. What's the problem? The problem is, Torah says, it's forbidden. This is an interesting question. What about the law of the land? They're not going to prosecute. They are not going to prosecute. Right? In many places. Very good. So what's the problem? Right? They're going to say, what? You're giving us permissibility to go steal? No. Yeah. Don't you have to hold to the law of the land? Yeah, well, it doesn't conflict with Torah. Okay. This conflicts with Torah. Doesn't matter what the law of the land is. Stealing. Right? And even when you tell me, according to the law of the land, it's okay. Let's say you being a Jew makes it look worse. Other people are doing it. Doesn't matter. We're going to be singled out. We are going to be singled out no matter what for any little thing we do. Because we are the Jewish people. That's the way it is. Right? I was telling someone earlier today that, talking about, it's a terrible thing with the hostages, which, it's still a terrible thing. We're not going to get into politics. Right? I was waiting for, that question. I think, Bibi's going to survive and this and that. So thank God that conversation didn't come up. But I said the single thing that makes no sense to me, which I've been saying this for a long time, still doesn't make sense, and that is, even if 20,000, quote unquote, Palestinians were killed, let's say, majority of them are terrorists, not a question. What about civilians? Isn't any civilian casualty, horrific? Yes. Terrific. Very good. The whole world does not give a lick for the fact that they were using human shields. Nobody cares. You hear people, you see videos, and I'm not saying you should, but you see videos, they overlook it, they don't care, and they admit they don't care. That doesn't matter. Israel's held to a higher standard. Why? Why? Assad can kill 600,000 people of his own people. No one says, boo. Hutus against the Tutsis in Rwanda, 1 million people died. No one says, boo. Serbs against the Croats, no one says anything. Yeah. And then they're calling this genocide. If it's really genocide, we're doing a bad job because their population has grown exponentially since 1948. So genocide means you wipe them all out. I mean, if they're expanding, and the birth rate's exploding, then we're doing a heck of a bad job. But that's like a mind-boggling thing, and nobody cares. And nobody cares. So the secular Jew tells me, yeah, he said it's unbelievable. Very pro-Israel, whatever. Okay, very good. Yeah, but we're held to a different standard. I don't think it's right in that sense. But even if something, this is the point, even if something would be permitted, right? Even if something would be permitted, yeah, it doesn't mean you should do it. People make that mistake. Well, if it's permitted, this and that looks bad. Totally looks bad, even if it is permitted, right? Even if it is permitted, it looks bad, right? It totally looks bad. Yeah. So even if it would be, even technically if it would be, so just because you could, then it doesn't mean you can do it. It certainly doesn't mean you can do it. Right. So, people get caught up in that. Also, people use government programs. Okay, if it's permissible, good. If they're lying to get benefits, and they own a house and it's in it's in someone else's name or whatever the case is, they're playing shtick. That's wrong. That, and if you get caught, it's a serious desecration of God's name. Right. So even if things are permissible, we still got to be careful. Someone here asks, what are the examples of people with autism or Down syndrome when they die? Good question. Now, we mentioned many times when a person is born that way, right? It's not a punishment for the person. Why? Because if a baby comes out as Down syndrome, right, usually happens, right? They're born that way, right? But let's make it easy. They're born that way. Down syndrome or autism, or let's say they have Asperger's, or let's say autism, or let's say they cerebral palsy. Yeah, whatever it is. It's not a punishment for the child. Remember, a child cannot be punished according to Torah. Why not? You have to be of age. Either 12 in a day for a girl, 13 in a day for a boy, or up until the age of 20. So it can't be punishment for the child. Very good. So what happens? So why is the child born that way? Why the parents have to have such a child? That's a good question. That's a good question. So the answer is I don't know. But the simple answer here is that it's not a punishment for the child. So why does the child get Down syndrome or autism or anything else bad, right? You fill in the blank, whatever it is. Why? Why do they get it? Because their soul's coming back. Reincarnation, Jewish concept, right? The soul comes back and it's fixing up whatever it needs to be fixed up. So the soul, and this is a very elevated soul, right? Certainly someone who has autism, they sense things that most people don't sense, even though, they're in a messed up body, right? The body's messed up. So it's a punishment for the soul, not a punishment for the parents. For whatever reason, the parents have to go through such a thing. Yeah. But it's a punishment for the soul. It cannot be a punishment for the child. Remember, it has to be of a certain age, right? So if you tell me person got at the age of 20 or later, that's okay. They must have done something. They must have done something to cause it to happen, right? Meaning sin. Yeah. But if they're born that way, it's not sin, right? It cannot be, it cannot be sin, right? Right? Why not? Why can't it be sin? Because again, they're not obligated. They are totally not obligated. They're not obligated in such a case. Right? They're not obligated here. Right? They're totally not obligated. So the simple answer would be that if they're under the age of 12 or 13 or under the age of 20, it's not a punishment. Not a punishment, something they've done in this world. It has to be, they've come back, their souls come back, and it's being punished. That's the problem, right? It's, in other words, it's an issue of reincarnation. It's an issue, the soul comes back, right? The soul's going to come back. And the soul, for whatever reason, has to be in a messed up body. So now, going to ask me the $1 million question. And the $1 million question. And the $1 million question is very good. So what happens to that soul? What happens when he dies or she dies? And the answer is that the soul should now be freed of any other punishment and should now it should be fixed up and be able to go to Olam Haba. It should be able to go, into Gan Eden. In the soul world, getting its reward for whatever, good things it did. This is a form of punishment. So once the soul was freed from this messed up body, the soul was freed. So the soul should be fixed up. Should be fixed up because it can't do anything. Right? In other words, it depends how bad the situation is. But let's say, severe autism or Down syndrome. I mean, what is a kid that has the Down syndrome? What are they capable of doing? Right? Some are more high functioning, some are less high functioning. Right? But what's the bottom line? The bottom line is that even if they're high functioning, they're still limited. They still have mitzvahs to do, but again, it's going to be looked at in a totally different way. Obviously, if they're lower functioning, God's not going to, why is God going to punish them more? Right? Once they die, God will say, why did you do this? Why did you do that? I said, what are you talking about? You gave me the IQ of a 5-year-old. What am I supposed to do? What in the world was I supposed to do? I see some whatever, not just Down syndrome, but whatever, people with handicaps, here. And someone's told me, they heard them on the phone speaking, one of the parents or whatever, and he said they sound, guy got to be in his 20s or more. Yeah, and this guy, he said he sounded like a 5-year-old, an absolute 5-year-old. Like what that person dies, the soul goes up. God's not asking the soul, why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? God knows he wasn't capable. Totally wasn't capable. Not his fault. Not his fault. He put the soul in a messed up body. That's what he did. Why? Punishment. So what should happen, right? What I understand what happens, and that is that the soul will get its proper place in the next world, whatever place it's going to be, because that's enough punishment. It doesn't have to suffer anymore. Get an opportunity to come back, right? So if it comes back in a messed up body, what can it do? Right? It's a messed up body. So the soul gets freed, gets all the punishment in this world for going through that. In the next world, they should be all right. That's what should happen. That's what should happen. So that's what I would say. Somebody asked long ago, I ran a training facility. Okay. Unmanned library. Took home 7 books, no firm intent of returning. Oh, okay. You want to atone and I live in a different country where you can't afford shipping. I would say at some point you have to return them. Right? What are your alternatives? Well, put aside money to send them back. That's one alternative. The other alternative is an unmanned library. If there are any fines, you probably have to pay whatever the fine is, right? If there are, over time, how much can the fine be? I don't know, right? But let's say you can't return it, there's no possible way. So you give money to charity. you should give a certain amount of money. It doesn't have to be, you know, if you would figure out how much it was late, then whatever, but you couldn't afford it, you should give a certain amount of money to charity, right? To a proper, to a proper charity, and have in mind should atone for that. But at some point, you give them back. I mean, find a way to give it back, right? At some point, when you have money, see, if you didn't have the book, let's say they got ruined, or they disappeared, you don't have them, that'd be a much easier issue. Then just you give money to charity. You have in mind to atone for that, right? And that's it. Donate books to a synagogue. You can do that, let's say, right? That's if you didn't have the books at all. This is worse. Why is it worse? Because you have the books in your possession, right? If you didn't have them in your possession, it'd be one thing. I'm not saying to lose them or burn them, get out of the problem. I'm not saying that, right? Two wrongs don't make a right over here, right? But I would say if you didn't have them, it's easier. Then just give, some money to charity. Have in mind that'll atone. If you have the thing in existence, you got to figure out a way somehow to give it back, right? That's what you have to do. You're going to have to give it back at some point, right? You can give money to charity. Have in mind, that should atone. Again, I'm not saying it has to be tens of thousands of dollars. Again, you give a certain amount, whatever it may be, whatever you can afford. Have in mind that should atone, but at some point, you should return the thing, right? You should definitely return it somehow. Again, doesn't have to be today, tomorrow, the next day, but once you have it, see, it's worse. You have it in existence. You have it on you. That's a problem. If you tell me you had nowhere to return it, the place went out of business or something like that, that's also a different issue, right? Then you got no one to return it to. Yeah. What about, here's an interesting question. Let's say person had outstanding credit card debt, right? A lot of people have credit card debt. It's unsecured, and certain states in the U.S. have statute of limitations. They can they can give it to a collection agency, only collect after up until like 5 years, 6 years, depends on the state. What happens? Let's say the company now goes out of business. It's and it's either the company goes out of business, or let's say the statute of limitations is done. Do you have to if the company went out of business, then that's it. Nothing to do, right? No one to return it to. If you wanted to, I mean, lifting Mishur Zadin, going beyond the letter of the law, which you don't have to, whatever you owe, you give it to charity. That you could do. You don't have to. So there's no obligation. Right? If you wanted to, you could. Okay. Yeah, same thing. Let's say a person declares bankruptcy. Now, bankruptcy is complicated. Some would say, even if you would declare bankruptcy, you still have to pay it. Others say, according to secular law, you're exempt. You'd be totally exempt. Right? They can come after you, but once you declare bankruptcy, it's over. There's nothing they can do. Right? I mean, ruin your credit for 7 years or 8 years, whatever it is. Totally ruin your credit, okay. But your creditors can't come after you. I'm not saying someone should do it. Person may not have a choice. Right? But the question is, according to Torah, do I have an obligation to pay it back or not? According to some, yeah, you still have to pay it back. Right? You would still have to pay it back. Others would say, once you declare bankruptcy, okay, so you don't have to pay it. Right? You're not obligated to pay it in that sense. Right? But, the question would be, the question would be, what do you do? What do you do if the company goes out of business? OOB, right? Out of business, right? Or there's a statute of limitations, right? Let's say the statute of limitations, it's done. Now, if a credit card company, if a collection agency comes after you after statute of limitation, you can sue them. They only have a certain amount of time, right? And they want to collect. They want to get something for it. Get 10 cents on the dollar, 20 cents on the dollar. Make a deal with them, possibly, right? If they take the deal, you don't have to pay it, right? You pay whatever you make the deal on. But again, a person could say, well, maybe you have to, you still have to pay more. Why end up paying less? Different issue, right? Different issue. Yeah, someone points out, also was going to mention, if you send it overseas, by a box, let's say, it's also, it's cheaper. That's true, right? That is, that's definitely true. But I'm saying, even if you can't do that, let's say you can't do that, so now you're holding on to them. So, right, if that's something you could do, good. If you can't do that, okay, right? But this gets messy because people say, well, I should pay it back. Okay, if you can pay it back, pay it back. If you can't pay it back, it's a bad thing, but it's unsecured loan. They can't go after you. There's nothing they can do. I mean, in theory, they could sue you, but they're not going to, right? They'll have a collection agency, whatever they can get, they'll get, right? But now the question is, what happens if statute of limitations is over? Let's say it's 5 years, 6 years, 3 years, whatever it is. Yeah, they can't harass you anymore. If they do, you can sue them. Okay. Now the question is, you still owe the money, though. You still owe the money, right? So some would say you still have to pay it, right? In full, not making a deal. You have to pay it, right? Just, if you can make a deal with a collection agency, good. If you can't, statute of limitations is done, right? So I got this question, whatever, many years ago, right? And that's the answer, right? That would be the answer, right? Or a person has to. I'm not saying they should. You have to clear bankruptcy. It's clear bankruptcy. What's the problem? Though you destroy your credit. It's not good, right? But sometimes you have no choice, right? Sometimes you have no choice. But yeah, if you can do it, sending it overseas by boat, yeah, it'll take 2 months to get there, 6 weeks or whatever to get there, potentially, then yeah, for sure it's going to be cheaper. But again, let's say you can't afford it. Yeah, let's say even that you can't afford it. Okay, so then you're stuck. Then you're stuck. Then I would say you give money to charity, have it in mind. If if at one point you can give it back, you have to give it back. Really, you have to give it back, right? So at some point you got to figure out how you're going to give it back. So I ask question: having a pet cat is a good idea for Noah, not a problem. First, gonna have a cat. Yeah, right. Better avoid having a cat. Let's say cat hurts some little kid. I don't know. That's the problem with cats, dogs. I don't think you have to worry about. The reason I don't think you have to worry about it is because, how often, a cat's going to do that. Let's say certain dogs, yeah, certain dogs more violent than others, right? I know someone who's terrified of dogs, even like of a poodle. They got bit when they were younger, right? They got bit by a dog. Yeah, even a poodle, a small poodle, like and barked and this and that. It's terrifying. Because of something happened in the past, right? Something happened. Something happened in the past that poodles, like, come on. I grew up with a poodle. I mean, they're small, but yeah, you can also growl and could they cause you damage? Yeah, in theory, but I don't think it's an issue, right? Well, I don't think it's an issue. So you don't have to worry. Cats may hurt people or not. I mean, cats here, they're tougher than dogs in most places. A lot of stray cats here, but it's not something you have to. Not something you have to worry about. Something's annoying you. Well, someone says, "What about for a Jew? It's better not to have a pet." I would say, yeah, right. It's really not a kosher animal, right? I've spoken about this before. Certainly for a single woman to have a dog, a male dog, that's a problem. That's for sure a problem. Now, what happens if it's a therapy dog? That's a good question. But in general, having non-kosher animals, I remember a friend of mine asked my Rabbi, should be well about having rabbits. Rabbits non-kosher, obviously non-kosher animals. So he said better to leave them outside. Now, if you leave them outside, got to be protected and make sure that other animals don't get to it or whatever. But you shouldn't bring it into the house. So in the outdoor Orthodox community, we don't have dogs. We don't have pets. Some people have fish. Some people have maybe have some parakeets. Whatever. But in general, those are more tame. Maybe some people might have gerbils. I don't know if people like gerbils, whatever. Again, my would probably say, have it outside, but a bird or a fish, maybe not. I know some people that do have fish or, parakeets, but in general, most people in the outdoor Orthodox community do not have pets. Now, the more modern community, yeah, they do. Yeah, they have dogs, they have cats, who knows what. But, in a more modern community, they will have, and a lot of people do. So it depends who a person identifies with. Yeah, they want to identify with a more modern community. Okay, right? So they'll dress a certain way. Yeah, they'll have pets. A lot of them have pets. Yeah, but I would say it's good not to bring a pet in the house. Certainly not, all these non-kosher, all these non-kosher animals. Person want to have fish or parakeets, probably better. Probably better. But again, in most, I know a few people that have. Okay, but it's certainly not the majority. It's not even close. And here it's funny. Hasidim, in general, are terrified of cats. I had neighbors that were like, a cat would come out or whatever. They were just like, the cat wouldn't even do anything. Wouldn't even hiss or nothing. They like ran a mile away, for whatever reason. Yeah, maybe it's because parents told stories, the grandparents told stories about going to the Holocaust and and these brutal attack dogs and this and that. Maybe I don't know, but here it's like Hasidim in general. Yeah, I don't know if it's anywhere else, but I definitely know Hasidim here. I'm terrified of cats. I always make sure, I take out the trash. Cats are always in the trash. They get the greatest of meals, not a problem, right? Certainly not starving by any stretch. Yeah, but like sometimes you throw in, all of a sudden you hear this hiss sound and like you jump, jump a mile. So, I'm like, all right, let's go. Let's see where you are. Bang on the thing. Come on, any cats here? Just so I say, you ain't gonna scare me. Forget it. But sometimes you forget. All of a sudden, you hear like this noise, and like a person jumps. But pretty harmless. Yeah, even here, even though they're stronger, they're tougher than in most other places. Someone asks, why for a single woman have a male dog? All right, I'm going to keep this conversation clean. Why do you think? There's a Torah prohibition. I'm going to get there one day. I don't know when. Right? In the book of Leviticus chapter 18, bestiality is forbidden for men and for women. That's why it's forbidden. Because we're worried about bestiality. You're going to say, it's not common. I don't know. Why did the Torah speak about it? The Torah speaks about bestiality. What do you think? We're living in Victorian England over here? I don't think so. Right? Because of bestiality. Now, the question would be, what if it was what if a woman needed it as a therapy dog? That's a good question, right? Still think it would be forbidden. Try and get a female dog, right? I would still think it would be forbidden. I mean, I do know someone that, they have a child on the autistic spectrum and whatever, they have a therapy dog, right? Kid needs a dog, okay. Dog for many years just passed away, got another dog, whatever. But, okay, it's a different issue. But for a woman, it's a bigger issue. If it's a male dog, it's a bigger issue because we're concerned about bestiality. You can say, hey, I'll never do it. It doesn't matter, right? It's a general rule. It shouldn't be done. Shouldn't be done. Somebody asked, I want to hit this one. 1 second. What's the punishment for those that stole my tefillin and holy books? What is the punishment? Stealing, you get lashes. Right? If a non-Jew did it, let's say a non-Jew did it, death penalty. Even if it's a minor amount, right? Even if it's a tiny amount of a non-Jew stole, it's death penalty. I mean, not everything a non-Jew transgresses, no-hide law is a death penalty. Here would be I think a rabbinic lashes they would get. That'd be the punishment. I mean, obviously they're going to pay it back. right? If they don't give it back, they pay the value of it. But even if they don't, that's what they would get. They would get rabbinic lashes, which we don't have today. I never grant forgiveness. I still pray for their demise. That's a problem. It's not make you evil, but it's a problem. It's a problem because of the lack of emunah. If someone had money taken away, or they suffered in other ways, that's basically saying God doesn't run the world. God's not in charge. That's a problem. That is definitely a problem. Yeah. And we mentioned before, the Gemara says, if you do such a thing and you pray for their demise, God's going to open your file. You're going to say, why? Why is God going to open my file? You only want your file open on Rosh Hashanah. That's it. It's the only time you ever want your file open. You don't want it open any other time. What's the problem here? Problem is, it's like you're saying, God's not doing his job. So it's a lack of emunah, right? The lack of faith and belief that God runs the world, right? You can, Brewery, Rabbi Meir's wife, told him when he was complaining about people in his neighborhood, they're giving him a hard time, he wanted to pray for them to die. So she said, don't pray for them to die, pray they repent. Right? But that's taking revenge. That's bearing a grudge. Right? That's Torah prohibition. That'll make you evil, it's Torah prohibition though. Definitely Torah prohibition. What about a Jew? Okay. All right, answered that. Orthodox reasons so using other means works once realized. Cat is a working farm animal. Okay. That's a different issue. If it's a farm animal, person has a farm, okay. So you have a farm. That's a different issue. It's not pets. You're not using them necessarily as pets, a farm animal. So that's different. You're raising farm animals. Okay. Now, we're talking about pets. You're not necessarily look at them as pets, per se. It's oat milk, mazonas, or shackle. It will be shackle, right? Because it's totally changed. The oats are totally changed. If the oats are running, let's say, and you can see the oats in it, then it would be mazonas or hadama, right? But I think oat milk, you're not going to see it. It's totally pureed, right? If it's totally pureed, so any drink, milk, soda, any of these things, the blessing is going to be shackle. Somebody asks, every animal has a purpose, for whatever purpose it is. Sometimes God gets rid of animals and species. Why does he get rid of them? Very good. Right? Because he doesn't need them anymore. So why did he put them in the world in the first place? Good question. We want them in the world now, he doesn't need them. Right? So he doesn't read them. Someone asked, it's still expensive to live in Israel. Yeah. That hasn't changed. It's expensive everywhere. But yeah, definitely expensive here. You have to feed the pet before yourself, right? No petting on Shabbos. Some say you can pet as long as you don't pull out any hair, but yeah, it's a problem. But yeah, there are laws. You have to feed the animal before you feed yourself, right? Yeah, the jungle bird. Okay. That's kind of funny. Okay. Also depends how you are raised. You had male dogs most of your life. Okay. Right? Nothing like that crosses your mind, but that's not the point. Right? There are laws in the Torah you're going to say that make obvious sense. Yeah, Torah doesn't need to tell me that. Very good. But there's one issue. I'm going to tell you what the one issue is, and the Torah says you got to do it, and you got to keep it, and don't think it doesn't apply to you. You're going to say, but it doesn't apply to me. Very good. And even if it doesn't, apply to someone else. Potentially apply to someone else. I didn't do any stats out there, but there are people that practice bestiality. Yeah, the fact. People, again, tell me it's a small percentage, a really small percentage, doesn't matter. The point is, it's forbidden. That's it. It's forbidden across the board, regardless of whether you think it doesn't apply to you or not. Rabbi's told me this many times, right, about certain things. You're going to tell me you're above this, and he says, no. When a decree is made, it's made. That's it. It's made, finished. Yeah. So even if you tell me, well, it doesn't apply to me. Okay, so what? Just because it doesn't apply to you doesn't mean it's still not forbidden. Cats were to have a song in Parak Shira. Okay. So a lot of animals. You got a lot of creepy crawly things in there, that also have, in Parak Shira. So doesn't mean they don't have a purpose. They may have a purpose in the world. Who says they have to be your pet? That's a different issue. They have a purpose in the world doesn't mean they should be your pet. That's a different issue. Right? The fact they're in Parak Shira, very good. So that's significant. Okay. Does that mean I should still have them as a pet? I don't think so. I don't think that changes anything. Right? I don't think it changes anything. Right? Yeah, let me see other questions here. Are there any other questions? Women are obligated to know laws of korbanos, of sacrifices. No. It's good to know, but you don't have certainly not an obligation. And a rabbinical court's not going to ask you that. Not going to ask you about sacrifice. It's to know, but no obligation at all. Grudges. Okay, what's the deal? Why does sibling harm their sibling for no given reason? Why do they pursue them, destroy everything? Okay, this is a big discussion. This is a big discussion. That, I think, maybe I'll speak about tomorrow. Right? When I do spiritual coaching, I think I'll think that that's a good topic. Right? Because I have to end in a second, so I'm not going to be able to get to it now. Right? But, keep in mind, the question that I never answer are questions exactly like this. Why did this person do this? Why did this person do that? I could give my spin on it. Why? You take someone, I'll give one example, then I have to end. Right? I'll give one example. You take somebody's got a lot of money, worked hard, got an inheritance, has a lot of money, right? And they have a sibling, let's say, struggling, having a hard time. Why does that person not say, I'm doing very well, I can help you? Why shouldn't they be a benefactor? Let's say. You tell me they're cheap, they're miserly. They, they only think about themselves. I worked hard, you work hard. I have to answer why the person doesn't. There's man than humanity to man. Yeah. Charity starts at home. I had somebody tell me, I'm going to end with this. I had somebody once tell me, it's a horrific thing. Never ever say this when you're down. When a person is down and basically on their knees, right? Somebody says, if you get down to your last, well, I didn't say this, to me, actually said to one of my kids, which is even worse, right? But if you get down to your last loaf of bread, call. Seriously? What say to me, it's one thing. Yeah. Because you should be doing this, you should be doing that, you should be doing the other thing. Right? Say it to a child, get a child involved. Like, I could help you, but I'm not going to help you until you're absolutely destitute. So don't help me. I'm not asking for help. God runs the world. Take care of things. Sometimes better, sometimes not, whatever it is. Right? God will take care of things. No problem. Never, ever, you open up your mouth like that, God should have mercy. God should have a lot of mercy in such a person. One person once said something to me and I told them straight. I said, you never kick a person in the face when they're down. Rule of thumb. No matter what you think, no matter what you believe, if they're down, you don't stomp on them. Now, you can tell me, isn't that obvious? I can speak about this for hours. For hours. Yeah. Isn't that obvious? Right? Last question is considered. Yeah, they're going to be tomorrow? Yeah. Send out the link later. It's okay to consider the person who stole needed it badly at that moment. We can give all kinds of reasons to justify why the person might have done it. Yeah. But the person's taking a loss. Right? This person was the conduit to do it. Are they guilty? They're guilty. 100%. They're 100% guilty. That's helping us overcome our evil inclination. Yeah. And God's using that person as a stick. Doesn't mean you don't get upset. A person will get upset, but why are you getting upset at the stick? So we always say. You're going to get upset at something else. What are you going to get upset at? You get upset at yourself because God's using this person. And what's the message? Why do I have to take a loss? That's a different question. All right, I'm gonna stop here because I have to run. I just every Tuesday and Thursday, 10 o'clock Eastern time, 5 o'clock Israel time. Anyone has any questions, you can find me on Facebook at Michael Chaim Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, orthodoxconversion.com, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I get videos on Q&As, ethics for our fathers, Book of Leviticus. You want to send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBI, CHIMCOFFMAN